Hello and welcome to another Energy Connects discussion ahead of Lisbon Energy Summit and Exhibition 2024, which is going to be taking place next week. As we move forward towards a more sustainable future, it is imperative to recognize the significant influence policies wield in shaping the trajectory of our energy systems. In today's rapidly evolving landscape, policies and regulations serve as a blueprint of change, crafting regulations, incentives, and frameworks that steer investment, innovations, and adoption of renewable energy technologies. I am very delighted to be joined by Martyn Link, Managing Director at Link Advisory. Thank you so much, Martyn, for joining us today. To dive right into it, what are the opportunities and challenges arising out of the global energy transition and the decarbonization of the energy industry?
Yeah, no, that's a big question. So it's really important. I mean, I guess part of the reason for this discussion is we're really looking at Portugal at the moment and ahead of the Lisbon Energy Summit next week, and so the energy transition in Europe is at a really critical point, and there's huge opportunities. We have a real chance to make a big impact on the economy and, create green jobs and, develop new technologies and reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. So, and really try and achieve some really ambitious targets that the region set over the next 8 years or so, well, it's 2030 and beyond, isn't it? So I guess that's getting sooner. So it's now 6 years. It's really, there's a real opportunity to kind of, build on the momentum that's been generated now and to try and achieve these targets and kind of shift entire economies over to more sustainable, jobs that are, benefiting the planet and providing prosperity for people. So yeah, that's kind of the opportunity. I think the challenge is really some of the progress has been good, but it's mixed. It's a mixed bag, right? So, since I started really heavily getting involved in the energy transition in 2019, and we did some scenario planning when I was at my previous company, and we looked at what the future could be like in 2035, and we looked at 4 different worlds that we created. And the main way that you do scenario planning is through looking at uncertainty and what are the biggest things that could change. And so we decided that the 2 biggest levers were, will the world work together and pull together? So like global solidarity was one of the levers, and the other one was, will we see technology deployed at a speed and cost that really enables the energy transition? So when you plot those 2 high and low, you get 4 different worlds. And the big thing that I took away from that process was in 3 of those worlds, we didn't achieve the energy transition and the Paris Accord. And only in 1 world did we achieve it. And that was the world where we had the highest degree of global solidarity and the highest deployment of technology. That was in 2019, and around the time that the US had pulled out of the Paris Accord, and then it came back in. And then obviously if you fast forward to 2022, I think it was, and we had the Ukraine war, which put a big rock in the pond, and we saw Europe having to respond to a war on its in its home for the first time in a long time, and that's had a big impact. So that's a big challenge, is how to deal with the geopolitical concerns at the moment. I would say that the conversation around energy transition went from being around sustainability and pace to more about energy security and affordability during that time. And it wasn't just the geopolitical, it was also the cost of living crisis, particularly in the UK. So we had the inflation here and interest rates, and so there's been a real shift, and we saw across Europe different countries responded in lots of different ways. And as we think about Portugal ahead of the Lisbon conference next week, clearly they've invested in renewables, which has done them really well and made them pretty energy independent. So Portugal's in a pretty good place actually in terms of the energy transition to kind of benefit from some of these opportunities and avoid some of the dangers.
From your point of view, how is Europe progressing on its Repower Europe roadmap to deliver cleaner and greener energy systems across the continent?
Yeah, I would say that the policy has been really beneficial to kind of free up some major financing and some funding. So we've seen in the last couple of years the EIB really increase its investment to providing a 30 billion in additional funding on top of what it originally said. And this is over the next 5 years to businesses and public authorities. So that was in October 2022. And then in July last year, it further increased its targets by bumping that up to 45 billion until 2027. So this is fantastic for companies and technology developers and operators wanting to invest in this area. And we've seen a bit of a mixed bag in terms of the outcomes. So part of it is good in that it's kind of, if you look at solar has grown well and continue to transform the kind of the renewable landscape across Europe, and Portugal in particular have this should help their target. They're targeting 20 gigawatts of solar power by 2030, and they're sitting about 3.3 or something at the moment. So that's going to help them definitely. But offshore wind has been a bit slower. We've seen a mixed kind of response in terms of trying to pick up pace in onshore and offshore wind due to delays in legislation, permitting, and approvals. And then it's really interesting seeing what's happened with natural gas at the moment. So some people, this is I would say quite an interesting topic, because some people want to say it's cleaner than, for example, coal. So it's better to use natural gas than coal. But then other people say, obviously, it is a fossil fuel, so we shouldn't use it at all. And it's an issue that has divided opinion. I think, and we've seen natural gas actually grow. I think there's additional LNG import terminals have been developed across Europe, and we've seen about 50 additional BCM being delivered to Europe. So this is benefiting. So I don't know if that's ironic or was what the EU was intending, but it's certainly a question for the summit next week about, is natural gas a stepping stone to a cleaner future, or is it a bridge for those who are working in fossil fuels to continue their business operating model? So yeah, I'll maybe come on to that later, but I think it's been an interesting couple of years seeing how that plays out.
You mentioned just a couple of different sources for renewable energy and such. What are the other new technologies that are playing a pivotal role in enabling the energy transition?
Yeah, great question. So I think it was in 2020 or something, the IEA announced that we have all the technologies we need to achieve our 2030 targets. So it was just about deployment and scale of renewables. So if you like, there's almost two sides to the energy transition. There's like, how do we do more with what we already have? And I would say, yeah, solar, onshore wind, offshore wind are part of that. Obviously, there's still innovation, right? So there's floating offshore wind is being investigated, and that could be transformational. But yeah, solar is now highly commoditized and at scale, largely a mature market in many ways. So then you're looking at the next phase of technology. And so for me, I'm particularly interested in hydrogen. I think that's a really interesting alternative to fossil fuels. When you think about electrons versus molecules, we will need a clean molecule, I believe, to help us to wean us off of some of the hard to abate sectors. And so when you look at the alternatives out there, there's hydrogen really stands apart as the best clean molecule. Now the challenge is to make it economical, and it's not economical. It's not cost competitive in most of the situations with fossil fuels, which is a big challenge. So yeah, I think there's lots of other technologies. I mean, the electricity infrastructure is needing strengthened. There's like smart grids. There's smart meters at home. There's battery storage, which could be really key. Pumped water storage. So there's a range of things that I think will be a part of the solution. But for me, I think hydrogen is probably the one that has the biggest upside potential. If you take, for example, what we were just talking about with natural gas, and think specifically about Portugal. So Portugal are doing pilot projects at the moment where they're blending hydrogen into natural gas pipelines, and at the pilot project they're looking at a 2% concentration, but they're actually aiming to see if they can get up to 20% blended hydrogen. And last year they had the first auction for companies wanting to win the rights to inject hydrogen into the natural gas grid. And so what's really interesting is that Spain and Portugal don't take any of the Russian gas. That doesn't come down the Iberian Peninsula, but they do have a gas grid, and this is from import terminals from LNG in Portugal that then gets distributed around the gas grid. And so there is potential in the future, if things play out this way, to bring in hydrogen potentially and pipe it across Europe from areas where there's plentiful solar, right? So the way to unlock hydrogen is really cheap renewable energy, which you can use, for example, if you've got abundant too much sunshine, and you use that to bring the cost down of green hydrogen, that could then be potentially piped across Europe. So you could have an alternative to fossil fuel gas from Russia. Obviously, that would require a lot of investment, but it could be a way of unlocking that whole part of the continent in southern Europe. So yeah, exciting times ahead to see what role Portugal plays in this.
Like we mentioned earlier, the Lisbon Energy Summit is coming up next week. So what are your thoughts about how the summit serves as like a catalyst for low carbon futures in Europe and beyond?
Yeah, I think I'm really looking forward to it. I'm excited because this feels like a really pivotal moment for Lisbon and for Portugal. Geographically, it's a strategic location. There's quite a few ports in Portugal, and Lisbon's probably better known for cruise ships than energy import and export. But it's a major hub, and there is real potential to catalyze some of this strategic kind of it's kind of a location on the western kind of peninsula of Europe to change the dynamics across Europe in terms of energy provision and sources, as I was saying earlier. Also, to kind of, when you look at Portugal itself, it's got real issues if you kind of think forward into the future around heat and drought. And so, the heat, if I talk about heat for a second, it hit 47 degrees Celsius in July 2022. And if you look at the projections, and if we don't manage to hit the 1.5, which is looking increasingly likely at the moment, this is going to be, on some parts of Portugal, going to be unlivable outside during the day. So that's going to require even more air conditioning, and that's going to require more energy. So there's a future where energy and water are going to be inextricably linked over the next few decades in Portugal. And for water, this time last year, 89% of Portugal, the mainland Portugal, was in drought. This time last year, and 34% of that was severe. So you've got this situation where there's abundant renewables, there is sufficient water most of the time, but then there's also quite a lot of drought. And so you're kind of trying to change the economy, change the energy system, whilst also, I think, building in some consideration of how you need to also think about water. So to me, this is it's really a pivotal moment, and obviously you've got all this funding and financing that's available. We're bringing together a load of technical, people, policymakers, politicians, business people, and it's got real potential to be a real game changer for the country if things go as we hope they do. And there's lots of partnerships and business relationships formed. And in fact, one of the panels I'm moderating, we're going to talk a little bit about the origin story for the companies. And one of these is husband and wife that were looking at the MOU between Rotterdam and Lisbon in terms of two ports working together to decarbonize Europe. And they decided to set up a company off the back of that. So we're going to hear about that next week. So yeah, exciting times.
Martyn, thank you so much for being with us today. It was a pleasure speaking to you, and thank you for your excellent insights. Before we go, just a quick reminder that the Lisbon Energy Summit and Exhibition is going to be taking place between the 27th and the 29th of May. You can register at lisbonenergysummit.com. A big thank you to everyone watching. Do not forget to follow us on all of our social media platforms to stay tuned to the latest news in the energy sector. See you soon with another Energy Connects discussion, and until then, goodbye.